I once thought the greatest pain in life came when a loved one passed away. But no, the real pain is when they are still alive, looking you straight in the eye, smiling and speaking as if they still love you, while secretly planning to strip away everything you have built. If this is the first time you are hearing my story, subscribe to the channel and stay with me for a while. Not because I need the attention, but because I believe that sometimes just hearing the story of a man who has lived through it might help you realize you are not alone in this life. That afternoon, the sky held no rain, yet the air was still in a way that felt suspicious. I remember it clearly because I was listening to a Schumann concerto on the radio while driving along Lakeview Ridge, the paved road winding around the lake, lined with maple trees, slowly turning to the color of dark wine. I had not planned to stop by Adrian's house, my son-in-law, but I had just received a set of research grant documents from the Wexford Foundation and thought it would be easier to deliver them to him directly. Adrian was a respected psychologist in academic circles, at least before that day, and we had worked together on many projects back when I was director of the Vermont Institute for Applied Neuroscience. The ivory Mercedes, the one I had bought for Elaine for her 60th birthday, caught my eye the moment I turned onto the stone-paved drive in front of the house. I did not stop the car right away. I just sat there, frozen, my hands still on the steering wheel, my eyes locked on that all-too-familiar car. Elaine was supposed to be in New Hampshire. At least that was what she had told me 2 days earlier, saying her mother had fallen ill and needed her care for a few days. But if that was true, then why was her car parked in front of Adrian's house at nearly 5 in the afternoon on a Wednesday? And why was the living room window half open, the curtains drawn carelessly, as if no one inside cared about being seen from the outside? A chill ran down my spine. That instinct, the one I had often dismissed, thinking I was too old and too suspicious, could not be ignored this time. Something was wrong. I turned off the engine, opened the door quietly, and walked toward the house, my heartbeat growing faster with every step. I had no intention of doing anything illegal. I did not think I would discover anything serious. But as I approached the slightly open window, I heard a voice I knew better than any other sound in this world. He is not as sharp as he used to be. Elaine's voice was low, not with concern, but with calculation. Think about it, Adrian. How many 61-year-old men are still clear-headed enough to manage a pension fund, read investment reports, or make major financial decisions without advice? Easier to work with if we have documentation to support that diagnosis, Adrian replied, his tone steady and deliberate, as if discussing a strategic plan. Not the man who had once guided him through the first steps of his career. I froze. They were talking about me. Elaine went on. We just need to carefully cite a few old test results, add a doctor's note about early-stage memory decline, then combine that with recent behavior. You know, the times he forgot his keys or asked the same questions twice in a day. The court will believe it. And once I am appointed his financial guardian, the rest will be much easier. Adrian gave a faint laugh. If everything goes on schedule, in just a few months, all of his assets will be under your control. The lakefront house, the 2 rental properties in Montpelier, and his shares in the Wexford organization. Elaine, we are talking at least 7 figures. Just taking back what I deserve, Elaine said, her voice light as a breeze, as if she were talking about a coat she had left somewhere, not her husband's career and reputation. I could no longer hear them clearly. Blood rushed to my temples, the pounding in my ears drowning out their next words. I stepped back from the window as silently as I had approached it. I returned to my car, but before starting the engine, I pulled out my phone and opened the recording app. A part of me, the part of reason that survived the shock, knew I needed evidence. I knew that if I confronted them now, everything would collapse beyond repair. I needed to stay silent, watch, prepare. And that is what I did. For the next 19 minutes, I kept my phone recording in my palm, my eyes fixed through the windshield on the house where my wife of 35 years was conspiring with my son-in-law to stage the greatest deception of my life. When I finally drove away, the first maple leaf drifted down onto my windshield. My heart seemed to fall with it, but inside me there was no pain anymore. There was something else, Cold, clear, and sharp as a blade I had spent a lifetime forging. Intelligence in silence. They think I am a slow old man unable to see an unfolding scheme, but they have forgotten that I have spent my entire career reading data, measuring behavior, and analyzing people. I am Lucas Reinhardt, and they have chosen the wrong man to awaken. I still remember the first time I met Elaine in the spring of 1986 at a scientific conference in Dartmouth. At the time, I was a researcher struggling to finish a presentation on spinal cord injuries, and she was a program assistant sitting at the reception desk with soft copper curls and a smile that made me forget my closing argument. Elaine was not someone who understood science, but she had a way of making the person in front of her feel like they were doing something important. I was drawn to that, the attention, the care, the ability to make others feel worthy of it. We dated for a few months before she moved to Vermont with me, where I began building the Institute for Applied Neuroscience from an old lab inside St. Joseph's Hospital. The early years were hell. No funding, not enough staff, outdated equipment. I worked 16-hour days, often sleeping at my desk. Elaine stayed by my side, making coffee, jotting down the ideas I mumbled in the middle of the night, even reading biomedical papers despite having studied French literature. I once believed that woman was the spiritual foundation for everything I built. We married in 1989. In 1995, Clara was born. Elaine became a wonderful mother, patient, meticulous, always present at school meetings with complete files in hand, while I fumbled with my tie on the way to class. In 2010, my institute made a major breakthrough, a predictive model for early neurodegeneration that was granted a patent. That same year, Adrian appeared, a recent Harvard graduate who came asking for an internship after reading my work in Neuroscience Today. I took him into my research group not just for his skill, though he was talented, but because of the hunger and gratitude in his eyes when we shook hands, the same look I once had when I was new to the field. In 2017, Clara and Adrian were married, a modest but intellectual wedding held in our backyard, wildflowers, red wine, and guests who were mostly colleagues and former students. I could not hide my pride. I had fulfilled my role as a father, a husband, a teacher. I had given everything I had. And then, in 2021, I retired. No one forced me. I was still healthy, my mind still sharp, my research still moving forward. But I felt it was time to step back, to give Elaine time to travel, to let Clara and Adrian take the front line, to live a little slower. I thought it would be a peaceful chapter. No research deadlines, no reports, just quiet and the woman who had weathered so many storms with me. But I was wrong. Elaine began to change. At first, it was small things, staying in New York with her yoga friends longer than planned, showing unusual interest in the stock prices of a pharmaceutical company I had once worked with. She started asking more about investment portfolios, long-term savings accounts, real estate papers, even the balance of Clara's trust fund we had set up when Clara was a child. I told myself these questions were signs of aging, natural worries in retirement. I must have repeated that line in my head 100 times. Elaine was just thinking of the future. She needed to feel secure. I did not see that it was not care. It was calculation. Then came the trips. More frequent, the reasons vaguer. My mother's joints are hurting again. I need to care for her a few days. My college friends are having a reunion. I will be gone for the weekend. The wellness center suggested I try a 10-day meditation program in Maine. Not once did she ask me to come along. Not once did she leave a clear itinerary. Once, I suggested we go back to Quebec, a place we had promised to revisit after our honeymoon. Elaine smiled and brushed it off. That would not suit us now. We are not the same as we were. The words hit like ice water, but I did not ask her to explain. After 35 years of marriage, I had learned that sometimes silence is the best way to keep peace. But silence is also the best way for someone to hide the truth. Clara knew nothing. She still called me the most honorable man in her life, still hugged me every holiday, still asked about my academic writing. She respected me not just as her father, but as a role model, a principled scientist, someone who always did the right thing. I do not think she knew her mother had changed, and if she did, Perhaps she told herself what I once did. She is just tired. I cannot recall exactly the first time I saw Adrian and Elaine being too familiar. Maybe it was at a family gathering when she laughed too long at one of his jokes, or when he opened the car door for her even though Clara was still sitting there. The glances, the small touches, the strange harmony in their conversations. At the time, I believed my wife was not that kind of person. I believed my son-in-law knew his boundaries. And I believed that if I simply held on to my trust, the world would not fall apart. Until that afternoon at Lakeview Ridge, when the ivory Mercedes appeared at Adrian's gate like a silent indictment. The moment I heard Elaine speak about me, as if I were a patient, an obstacle, a fool to be removed, something inside me cracked open. It turned out the one I trusted most was the best actor, and the man I once guided was the director of that play. I had lost my trust, but not myself. And from that moment I knew, if I wanted the truth back, I had to stop being the scientist and start being the strategist. Some things seem reasonable at first glance, but when you link them together, they are like stones already laid to form a path leading you straight to a pit. And the more I thought about it later, the more I realized those stones had been placed there a long time ago. I was simply the one who never saw them. It began with a suggestion as laughed off the first time I heard it. "Lucas, I think we should set up a financial power of attorney," Elaine said, her voice as gentle as ever, as we sat having afternoon tea on the back porch. "Not because I doubt you, but after what happened to Uncle Gerald with that sudden stroke, I think this is necessary. If anything ever happens, I could step in to handle investments, move funds, pay expenses." I set my cup down on the wooden table. Her words did not alarm me, but they caught my attention. Elaine had never shown any interest in handling finances in 35 years. The same woman who once could not remember her bank card PIN was now suggesting we give her power of attorney. I asked, keeping my tone even, "Do you think this is urgent enough that we need to do it right now?" Elaine shrugged, her gaze drifting toward the lake as if it hardly mattered. "We are not young anymore. It is just precaution. I have read that many couples have already done it. Having this in place would give me peace of mind." I nodded, offered no argument. But that night I logged into our online accounts and reviewed every transaction for the past 6 months. Nothing unusual. But the real irregularity lay in how they made me think I should hand over control, as if I were a wise old man preparing for his twilight years, not someone being steered toward a trap. A few days later, Adrian sent an email. Subject line, "Neurodecline research files. Please review." I was a little surprised, but not suspicious. He often sent me new material to discuss as a way of keeping our academic connection alive. But this time, the attached PDF was not new research on Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. It was a checklist for assessing early cognitive decline in older adults, along with sample forms for evaluating legal capacity. Collected these for the upcoming joint research. A lot comes from the Vermont Psychiatric Center, where Clara did her thesis, Adrian noted. I opened the file, reading each line, forgetting recent events, sudden mood changes, disorientation about time and place. I could not tell what chilled me more, the content itself or the way it was disguised so neatly under the cover of a academic discussion. I said nothing. No questions, no replies, no reaction. I simply created a private folder on my computer, saving every email, every document, every small gesture from both Adrian and Elaine. And I began to wait. From then on, I started to notice a series of inconvenient coincidences circling around me. Clara, my daughter, suddenly began asking if I was getting tired, if I was eating enough, if I needed a long rest. "Dad, have you thought about maybe taking a few months off?" she asked one morning while we were at the market. "Not because you are weak, just maybe the brain needs rest like muscles do." Her words made me pause. Clara, who had always been proud that I still worked after retirement, still wrote books, still gave lectures, was now suggesting I stop entirely. I did not answer her question. I asked one of my own. "Do you think this is from you or from someone else?" Clara hesitated, avoided my eyes, then smiled faintly. "No one. I guess I am just worrying too much." I did not want to suspect my own daughter. I did not want to believe she could be part of this game. But I knew Clara trusted her husband deeply. And Adrian, as a psychologist, had all the authority he needed to plant seeds of doubt, gently, subtly, deliberately. A few weeks later, my longtime physician called. A familiar voice I had trusted for 15 years. Lucas, we received a request for an expanded routine checkup for you from your wife. She seems a little concerned about your memory and concentration lately. I held the phone away from my ear for a moment before answering. Do you feel you are doing fine? He asked again, a hint of hesitation in his voice. Perfectly fine, I replied. I have never missed an appointment. I still read 3 research papers a week. And I remember clearly that you are allergic to cashews and broke your leg ice skating in 2014. There was silence, then a light chuckle on the other end. Then I suppose you are doing fine. Day by day, I felt the loop tightening around me, not through force, but through language and feigned goodwill. They were not forcing me to do anything. They were encouraging. They were not declaring me weak. They were just concerned. Elaine stopped mentioning the power of attorney directly, but now and then she would leave the form sitting on my desk. If you change your mind, just sign it. No pressure. I would nod, smile, then place it in a drawer. I never signed anything, but I kept everything. As for Adrian, he kept sending supposedly academic articles, with behavioral disorder charts conveniently inserted. Once I responded, "Thank you, but I don't think this direction fits our research." He only replied briefly, "I understand, but I hope you will still take a look. It might be useful later." Useful to whom? By this point, I had no doubt. Elaine and Adrian were not just plotting to take my assets. They were building a complete legal case to prove I was no longer competent to manage my own life. This was no longer simple betrayal. This was making the victim question their own mind. And if I had not been clear-headed, if I had not known my true worth, perhaps I would have believed them. But I am Lucas Reinhardt. I have defended my thesis before an international panel, challenged hundreds of flawed studies, fought for my institute's funding through 6 state administrations. They chose the wrong person to build a trap for. I said nothing. I let them keep playing their game. Meanwhile, I began setting my own board, one where I was no longer the pawn being moved, but the player holding the queen from the very first move. That morning, the sky was a heavy gray. No rain, no wind, just the dense stillness of a day when nothing good waits ahead. Elaine called up to me from downstairs. "Darling, remember we have our routine checkup in Brattleboro today." I walked down the stairs, the coffee not yet hitting my system, my mind still tangled with a few lines from the papers I had been reading the night before. "A checkup for what?" I asked, trying to recall if I had any appointments with a doctor that week. Elaine smiled, the same smile I had known for 3 decades. At the Comprehensive Care Center, they have a package that includes memory testing as a part of the full health evaluation for older adults. I booked it a month ago. I thought it would be convenient. I paused. Part of me wanted to refuse, to come up with an excuse, but I knew refusing now would be an alert. It would give her a reason to say I was afraid of being tested, or worse, that I was avoiding it because I was confused, so I nodded. "All right, let's go." The drive to Brattleboro took an hour. Elaine talked about Clara, about replacing the old car, about a Simon and Garfunkel song she had heard that morning. I sat in the passenger seat, pretending to listen, but my mind was scanning the files I had stored on my phone, the documents hidden in the secret compartment in my library, and most importantly, a USB drive tucked inside the old locket Clara had worn as a child. The Comprehensive Care Center was housed in a beige building, nothing suspicious at first glance, until I stepped inside and realized everything had been carefully prepared. A smiling receptionist invited me to sit. A doctor in a white coat emerged, shaking my hand as though we were old friends. "Mr. Reinhardt, please come into exam room number 4. Everything is ready." Elaine smiled at me, resting her hand lightly on my shoulder. "It's nothing, love. Just a few checks. I'll wait outside." I followed the doctor into a room that was too spotless to feel comfortable. On the desk lay a thick file, several printed forms, and a tablet waiting to be powered on. "We will run some basic cognitive tests, Mr. Lucas," the man said, his eyes fixed on the papers instead of me. "Just procedural, but first, We need you to sign a consent form for legal purposes. I sat down. The document in front of me was long, titled, Consent to appoint a financial representative in the event of temporary or permanent incapacity. The representative's name was already filled in, Elaine Margaret Reinhardt. Beneath it was a vague explanation about risk prevention, sudden medical events, temporary authorization to protect the patient's financial safety. I stared at those words as if I could burn them away with my eyes. Then I looked up and asked, "Is this required for the health assessment?" The doctor hesitated. "We recommend it. Many older patients have signed it. Just to avoid disputes later," I smiled. A genuine smile, but not for him. I picked up the pen, but instead of signing, I flipped to the back, then back to the front, then suddenly said, "Excuse me, I need to use the restroom." He nodded and pointed down the hall. I stepped out, closed the door behind me, and saw Elaine standing in the lobby, head bent over her phone. I pulled out my own phone, started the voice recorder, and slipped it into my breast pocket. Then I went back in, picked up the file, pretended to read, then folded it carefully. "Have you signed?" the doctor asked. "I think I need another copy to read thoroughly at home," I said, my eyes still on the file. "I might sign it right away, but I want one to keep. Actually, we need the original for our internal records. And I need the original for my lawyer to review," I cut in, my voice light. "It's fine, I'm not refusing. I'm just not signing yet." He stayed silent. A short pause, thick with friction. Then the door swung open. "Dad." Clara stood there, breathless, her face not yet hiding her fear. "Dad, come with me," she said without explaining. Elaine appeared behind her, pale. "What are you doing here?" "I just spoke with Karen, Dad's old nurse from the hospital. She works here part-time. She saw Dad's name on today's list and called me. Dad, let's go." I didn't ask questions. I stood, took the unsigned file, and followed Clara. Elaine called after us. "Clara, you're misunderstanding. This is just a checkup." Clara didn't turn around. "Mom, if it's just a checkup, then why does Dad have to sign a financial power of attorney in the middle of it?" We got in the car. Clara drove. I stayed silent. Only when we were about 10 miles from the center did I speak. "Are you sure you're not mistaken?" Clara was quiet for a few seconds. "No, Dad, I know that kind of checkup. It's used as a cover, and I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner." I put my hand on her shoulder. "It's all right. What matters is that you came." Clara bit her lip. "Mom might hate me for this, but I'd rather have her angry than have you sign something you don't fully understand." I smiled faintly. "I understand more than they think." We reached home near midnight. I carefully copied the unsigned file, scanned every page, and saved 3 versions on secure drives. Outside, a thin rain began to fall. A light rain, as if the sky itself was washing away the disguise that the person I once loved most had tried to create. I wasn't angry at Elaine, not in that moment. I no longer had feelings strong enough to call anger. Only absolute clarity, and one thought repeating in my head: they think they've staged a play, but they chose the wrong leading man. I once ran a neuroscience research institute with more than 80 staff members, managed over $12 million in federal funding each year, and presented academic findings before government committees. Yet I nearly fell to the schemes of the 2 people I trusted most in my life. I would not allow that slip to happen again. The next morning, I drove alone to Boston to the office of Miriam Cates, an attorney specializing in asset protection and elder financial abuse. I had worked with her once in 2015 when my institute faced an unexpected denial of a major grant. She was sharp, cold, and most importantly, not easily deceived by a polished exterior. Miriam walked into the private meeting room in a dove gray wool coat, notebook, and black coffee in hand. "From your voice on the phone," she said, "I knew this was more than a typo in a will." I didn't smile. I unlocked my phone, pulled up the audio recording from the day at Adrian's house, and handed it to her. Miriam put on her headphones and listened straight through without pausing, without asking questions. At minute 9, when Elaine mentioned the assets I supposedly didn't deserve, her eyes narrowed. When Adrian spoke about prearranged psychological evaluations as grounds to petition for guardianship, she stopped the recording and removed the headphones. "We have a deliberate scheme here. Intentional. planned, with verbal evidence. And you're fortunate you haven't signed anything, she said. Now it's time to hit back. Within a week, Miriam and I formed a small investigative team. She brought in an independent investigator, Jonas Lynn, a former FBI agent specializing in elder financial exploitation. He wasn't flashy or loud, but he had a way of making people reveal things they didn't intend to. We began with my own documents, the recordings, Adrian's vague and suggestive emails, the paperwork I had been told to sign at the Brattleboro Center, and the dates Elaine's absences aligned with unusual transactions in our accounts. Clara, moving from pain to fury, dug into her mother's old files, emails, notebooks, even the stack of receipts Elaine kept in the living room drawer. One night, Clara burst into my study where I was reading a report, her face flushed as she held out a bundle of papers. Dad, Mom set up a trust called Kerr Investment Holdings last year. The co-beneficiary is Adrian Kerr. She used his law office address to receive notices. I took the file, my hand steady, though I felt ice water pour into my chest. Where did the funds come from? From part of my retirement account, the one Elaine co-owned. Each transfer was just a few $1,000s, small enough to avoid attention, but over 10 months they had taken more than $67,000. Can we get it back? Claire asked, her voice unsteady. Legally, if we can prove coercion or fraud. Yes, I said. Morally, nothing will ever be returned. Jonas expanded the search. Quietly, he contacted Adrian's former patients, particularly older ones. The first 3 responses were eerily similar. Adrian had suggested they create trusts to prevent disputes among heirs. He would then introduce an investment advisor, who turned out to be Elaine, under an alias. Together, they had moved tens of thousands into accounts the clients no longer controlled. Jonas compiled a list of potential victims, 8 people, all over 65, all loosely connected to Adrian Kerr within the past 3 years. One man, Roger Dunn, a retired high school teacher, spoke through tears. I thought he was helping me set up my finances for my grandchildren. Now the money's just gone. After reviewing the list, Miriam said, "This isn't just a plot against you. This is a professional operation, systematic, with a licensed psychologist as the front and someone else directing the play." Can they be prosecuted, I asked. Yes, but not yet. Miriam's gaze was as cold as steel. To bring down a system, you need more than truth. You need timing. I understood. The earlier we showed our cards, the more time they'd have to erase the trail. I had to let them believe I was still unaware, give them space to keep acting. Meanwhile, I began reclaiming my financial control. I updated all my personal account permissions, moved large sums into a secure account in my name only, and revoked Elaine's co-management rights on my retirement fund. I did it calmly, as if following a financial advisor's recommendation. No one but Miriam knew I was tightening the reins ahead of the final act. Clara stayed by my side the entire time. She didn't need me to ask. She chose to stand with the truth, even when that truth cut into her deepest loyalties. One late night, while we were going over the list of assets her mother had siphoned away, Clara sat still, gripping her pen. "Dad," she said, "I'm afraid Mom may have never truly loved you." I looked at my daughter, eyes like my own 30 years ago, the moment I first realized trust could be shattered. I said, "I don't need your mother to love me anymore, Clara. I just need you never to let anyone distort the truth." She nodded, tears brimming. "I won't let them erase you. Or me." When I closed the final file on the last night of the 3rd week of investigation, I knew I had everything I needed. The truth, the proof, an ally, and a complete list of those who thought I had been asleep, when in fact I had been wide awake all along. I once believed that the truth, no matter how painful, had to be spoken in a place where no one could silence it. But I was wrong. There are truths that do not need to be shouted. They only need to be placed in the right place, at the right time, and in the right hands. On the evening of April 14th, I sent out 3 emails, one to the Ethics Committee of the Vermont Psychological Association, attaching audio recordings and case files of elderly victims, one to the Green Mountain Journal, the local paper that still held its dignity in reporting, where I had once contributed to the public science column, and one to the office of the Vermont Elder Protection Council, with the subject line, urgent, psychologist exploiting position to manipulate patients and their families. I did not write at length. I did not plead. I simply laid out the facts, with evidence, with documentation, with specific names. At that moment, I was no longer a victim. I was the one delivering the file. 2 days later, my phone rang at 8:16 in the morning. The voice of a middle-aged woman, calm yet serious, said, "Hello, I'm Deborah Langston, representing the Psychology Ethics Committee. We have just opened a preliminary investigation based on the evidence you provided. Can you confirm the authenticity of the recordings and documents?" "I can," I replied, "and I am ready to cooperate fully." That afternoon, the Green Mountain Journal ran a front-page story in the Special Investigations section. Renowned psychologist accused of exploiting elderly patients to manipulate assets. Accuser is father-in-law. The investigative report revealed that Dr. Adrian Kerr, 37, once a trusted counselor to many elderly patients in Vermont, had encouraged individuals to establish trust in his favor, using vague suggestions of mental instability and legal incapacity. The scheme was exposed by his father-in-law, Lucas Reinhardt, former director of the Vermont Institute for Applied Neuroscience, who had narrowly escaped a similar slot himself. The article did not pry into private life. It didn't need to. The facts and the neutral tone were enough for the entire community to understand. Adrian Kerr was no longer the doctor they once trusted. 3 days later, the Vermont Psychological Committee convened an emergency internal hearing. Adrian was ordered to suspend his practice until the investigation was concluded. That notice spread within professional circles faster than any news. Elderly patients began speaking out. Some could not recall the details, but most remembered, "He told me I should let someone trustworthy manage my finances." Several had lost tens of thousands of dollars. I no longer needed to speak up. The very people Adrian once thought were the easiest to manipulate, the ones he treated as assets to be transferred, had now become witnesses against him. And Elaine, she was not convicted. She was not prosecuted. But her collapse required no courtroom. In her circle, the wives of professors, directors, business owners in the Wyndham area, reputation was the last currency. When reputation collapsed, there was nothing left to buy her presence. Elaine called me 3 times. I did not answer. Her messages were short. "What are you doing? Everything is being misunderstood. I didn't know that article would put your name in it." I did not respond. A week later, at the Brattleboro City Charity Board meeting, Elaine's name was removed from the management list of the Arts Scholarship Fund. An old friend, Beverly Hall, who had once hosted Elaine's 60th birthday party, sent her a lunch invitation, then canceled right after the media ran a follow-up article featuring the account of Mr. Dunn, a 72-year-old victim, where Elaine once walked into every party, every board meeting, every social donation circle. She was now no longer invited. Clara, of course, knew everything. She read every article, received every call from old friends asking, "Is it true your mother?" And each time she gave the same answer. "I choose to believe the truth." She filed for divorce right after Adrian was suspended. No noise, no explanations, a unilateral divorce, no claim on property, no disputes, just 2 words: betrayal. One evening while I was in the library, Clara walked in carrying 2 cups of hot tea. She didn't say much. We just sat there, father and daughter, like 2 people who had survived a landslide, counting the stones left behind. "You know, Dad," she said softly, "there were times I thought I was losing my mind. Between my mother, the one I loved, and my husband, the one I trusted, you were the only one who never showed doubt about anyone. And because you didn't react, they thought you didn't know anything." I looked at her and nodded. That was the only thing that gave them confidence. "And it was also the thing that destroyed them," Clara said quietly. I didn't need to reply. We stayed silent. There are victories that need no applause, no grand courtroom, no sentence with legal force. They only need the truth brought into the light. And those who thought themselves smarter than justice, forced to bow before the very plan they had built with such care. I did not win because I was stronger. I won because I was more patient, and because I never forgot. Real justice does not need to be shouted. It only needs to be heard. I once thought the courtroom would be a place of noise, where people shouted, blamed, and fought with words and tears. But it was not. My hearing unfolded in silence. the kind of silence that can only exist when all the evidence has already spoken long before. The judge looked at Elaine's file, the stack of documents she had submitted more than a month ago, and tapped his fingers on the wooden bench for an unusually long minute. The petitioner was Mrs. Elaine Margaret Reinhardt, filing for the court to appoint her as the financial guardian for her husband, citing mild but progressively worsening cognitive decline. The judge asked, "Do you have any official medical diagnosis?" Elaine sat on the opposite side, hair neatly pinned, plain clothing, her version of humble after the press coverage. Her voice trembled, not from emotion, but from knowing the game was at its end. "Your Honor, I do not have an official diagnosis, only repeated symptoms I have observed over many months. My husband forgets many details, confuses appointments, and sometimes speaks incoherently." My attorney, Miriam, raised her head, and during all that time, Mr. Reinhardt continued to manage his personal accounts directly, give academic interviews, write for Neuroscience Weekly, and work with major financial institutions. Elaine said nothing. The judge gave a slight nod. "We have also received the investigative report from the Ethics Committee and the Vermont Elder Protection Office, along with testimonies from 6 patients who were victims of Dr. Adrian Kerr, your son-in-law." The silence in the courtroom at that moment was heavier than any accusation. The judge looked directly at me. "Mr. Reinhardt, after reviewing the entire file, I officially deny the request for guardianship. There is no legal basis to declare you incapacitated. You retain full control of your personal assets, retirement funds, and any related real estate." Then he turned to Elaine. "And under Clause 8 of the Marital Property Agreement signed in 1992, reaffirmed in the 2013 amendment, any attempt by the wife to seize assets through improper legal means will result in disinheritance in all cases." Elaine's face went pale. I did not look at her, not because I did not want to, but because I knew that a glance of pity at that moment would be more brutal than any sentence. Clara filed for divorce in the first week after the hearing. She demanded nothing, no pleading, no public statement to the press. The filing simply read, "Divorce due to irreparable loss of trust. The respondent engaged in unethical conduct and caused severe emotional harm." The court granted it immediately. At the same time, the Vermont Ethics Board issued an official notice: permanent revocation of psychologist Adrian Kerr's license for serious violations of professional principles and exploiting patient trust for personal gain. I was not present when Adrian received that decision, but I could picture it clearly. The man who once confidently spoke about perfect financial and legal strategies, now likely sitting in an empty office, scrolling through old emails, trying to salvage the remnants of a reputation. No one told me where he went after that. I did not ask. A week after the trial, I received a handwritten letter. No name on the envelope, but I recognized the handwriting from the very first line. "Lucas, if you are reading this, it means you are still calm enough not to tear it up immediately. I am not writing to seek forgiveness or to explain. Perhaps because after everything, the only thing I can still do is admit I was wrong." I read each word slowly, not because I wanted to prolong the pain, but because pain was the only thing still real in what we once called a marriage. "I thought you no longer loved me, that after you retired, my life would be forgotten in reports and cold cups of tea. I felt small next to all you had built. And Adrian, with all his admiration, with promises to make me feel needed again, filled that void. I have no reason left to justify myself. I cannot blame age, loneliness, or the past. I hurt the one person who trusted me most, and now that truth will live in me until the end of my life. If I can say one last thing, I am sorry for turning love into a weapon, and for turning a decent man into a target for calculation. There was no 'I love you,' no 'I miss you,' only an apology that came far too late. I folded the letter, placing it in the bottom drawer, where I kept unpublished scientific drafts, letters from a late friend, and a few black and white photos of Clara as a child. I did not hold on to resentment. I held on to the silence, and I let others face the consequences of their own choices. Justice to me is not punishment. It is clarity. It is a man walking into court with his head held high, leaving with his dignity intact and not needing to say a single word for the entire town to understand what is right and what is true. I did not return to the Vermont Research Institute. What needed to be closed, I had already closed in silence. Now, I spend my mornings in the local library rewriting my life, not to complain, but to make one thing clear. Some losses are not measured in money, but in the betrayal of the person who slept beside you for 35 years. Clara founded a center called HomeGuard, a place that supports elderly people whose assets are exploited by their own family. Its office is located near Adrian Kerr's old workplace. Without saying a word, I know she is correcting something I once failed to do, protecting those who no longer have the strength to protect themselves. I was invited to serve as an honorary advisor for an ethics center. I no longer teach, I only tell stories. A student once asked me, "What if you hadn't discovered it in time?" I replied, "I would still live, but I would no longer be myself." And that is the real loss. A university asked to use one of my old research papers. I only requested that the chapter title be changed to, "When the Truth is the Only Legacy." I do not tell this story to be pitied. I tell it so that anyone being labeled incompetent will know not to stay silent when the truth is being twisted. Some counterattacks do not need knives, do not need harsh words. They only require you to remember exactly who you are. And if one day you see your family member's car parked outside a house they swore they would not visit, if you hear them speaking about taking what is rightfully yours, what will you do? Stay silent and accept it, or stay silent and record it? If you are still listening, thank you. Subscribe to the channel to hear more stories where silence is the clearest voice of all.